Welcome back. In this session, we are going to address a common problem we see within the delimited files. In some circumstances, your delimited data might contain the delimiter within the data item itself. Let me take a concrete example to demonstrate it. We're going to use the vendor files for that. So as you can see, I've got three different vendor files here. So the vendor.csv and vendor escaped and unquoted. Vendor.csv is the one we're going to take forward for the course, but the other two are here just to demonstrate the issue. So I'm going to open up the vendor in Visual Studio quote. As you can see, the file has got two columns, vendor ID and vendor name, but the first red card itself has got the vendor ID is 1. But the vendor name is Creative Mobile Technologies, LLC. So that is one data item as the vendor name. But this date item has got a comma here, which is kind of unexpected for the parser. So it can confuse the parser, and the parser might think there are 3 columns in the data, whereas the header says that is only 2. So that's difficult for the parser to handle. But let's try and query this file using the CSV parser and what comes out, and then we'll go ahead and fix the issue. Let's start creating a new script. I'm going to create it in Discovery, and I'm going to call that 3_Explorer vendor. And we don't want to be running against the master database. So I'm going to switch to the NYC Taxi Discovery database. And also we want to have the select statement, so I'm going to copy it from my calendar file and then just make the appropriate changes we need. So we're going to read from the vendor unquoted files. So I'm going to give that here. And also I'm going to call this alias as vendor, because we are reading the vendor data rather than the calendar data. Let's run it through and see what comes out. Unless you can see it, read the 2 columns, because we said actually that is a header and it's got the vendor ID and the vendor name, but the vendor name has been truncated here. So it left at the point where we had the 3rd comma or the 2nd comma. So let me bring the file over again. And as you can see, it went up to the mobile technologies, and then it said, actually, that's where the 2nd column finishes. And I don't know anything about these things. I don't think it puts any warning messages. And there are no warning messages, and it's simply taken to the data which is after the 2nd comma from here. But we don't want that. We want the full vendor name to be displayed here. And that's what is the real data. There are 2 ways to fix this issue. The first one is to escape the comma here, which is actually the data. So if you do a slash, for example, at the beginning, the parser is going to assume anything following the slash. That character is not considered as a delimiter. You will have to tell the parser you escaped character as well. Or you could call every string so that actually anything within the quote is going to be considered as one data item. So we can do both of them. I'm going to show you both options. Let's start with the escape. So I'm going to show the data file again. I'm going to open up that so that either vendor_escape.csv. So I'm going to open that in Visual Studio quote. And then you can see. So that's what I've got in the escape.csv file. So let's deal with that first, and then we can switch to the other one. So I leave the select as it is, and then I'm going to start a new one and then show you what happens. So it's going to be vendor_escape2. Here, you need to specify your escape character so that you escape char, and then that is equal to and. You specify your escape character because the slash itself needs to be escaped again. So we'll put a double slash for that. So that's what you need to do. And then you do that and then run the statement. It should bring back the right data. And as you can see, that comma is now being considered part of the data. So that's why you see that. And the other one we wanted to do is to double quote. So let me again copy the select statement. And this time let me show you the data first. Unless you can see here, every string has been quoted. So this data item when the name has gotten double quotes around every data item. So let me close that, and I'm going to change the vendor escaped vendor.csv because that's the file which has got the double quotes. We don't need the escape char anymore, but instead you can specify the field quote. So let me specify the field quote. And that is the double quote that. So let me run this now. And it should work in the same way. So we got the comma within the data itself. But if I remove the field quote here, it would have no effect. Let me run that. And you might be wondering why. That's because the default field quote is a double quote. So if your data has been quoted only with a single quote, then you would have to specify or any other characters you want to use. For example, you could specify that character here. But if you are using a double quote, that is the default field quote. So you don't have to specify that, you can just drop that. So these are the two ways you can fix your data. But in these circumstances, you got to remember that you will have to go back and ask the supplier of the data to make sure that it is either being quoted or it's been escaped. But in these cases, as we said, actually, the field quote doesn't always have to be double quote. If you want to use a single quote, you can use that as well, or any of the characters. And similarly, escape character by default. Normally people use the slash, but you could choose the of the character as well. So that's the end of this lesson, and I'll see you in the next one.